Okay, here we go. First of all, I'd like to apologize for this hot mess. I have the flu, sinus infection. My voice will go and come, but I'll do my best to stay here. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm a PYP coordinator in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia for the past 3 years. And previous to that, I was a deputy PYP coordinator for 2 years, teaching in the PYP for 21 years now. And this is my 29th year in education. I always thought I would retire after 30, but it turns out it wasn't 30 years, 29 years, and this will be my final year in school. So what I'm going to do is just work on my coaching. I'm also an NLP coach, which mainly deals with trauma, addictions, students with learning disabilities. So it's for students and adults. Yeah, and I'm a PYP teacher on Instagram. All right, so today, this is basically kind of like a refresher on differentiation. I don't know if my thing is blocking your view.
No, we can see it.
You can see it, okay.
We can see it all.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so what is differentiation? And so the form and function of differentiation, and I'm going to just talk a little bit about assessment and then stop there and leave it to Susan because she's got a whole wonderful presentation on assessment, differentiating assessment. So what is differentiation? When I first started teaching 30 years ago, differentiating was giving the same tasks to all the students, and then the ones that I called high ability, middle, or approaching, I would kind of give them the same thing, but less. So the high ones would do 10 questions, the middle ones would do 5, and then the ones who were kind of catching up would do the first 2 or 3. We very, very quickly figured out that that is not differentiation. That definitely isn't one of the best ways to be practicing differentiation. And there's so many different ways of doing it, with differentiating the content, the process, the product, and of course, the learning environment, the learning styles. So what I focus on as a PYP coordinator when I do my learning walks or I do the training with all the staff new to PYP or new to teaching or just kind of changing curriculums is really focus on the different learner profiles and how students learn and how they engage in learning. So the reason we do it is why we differentiate learning is, well, basically to be able to reach all learners, to be able to reach all different learning styles, all of our inclusion students, and that includes the learning support and the gifted and talented. So making sure that there's challenging, open-ended questioning for those who are able to extend their learning too. It encourages agency and independence. And of course, agency in the PYP is one of the key factors of how learners learn. When their voice is heard, when they have a choice in the task that they choose, in the learning environment that they sit in. So using flexible seating, using centers, kind of differentiating your learning in that way is also a very, very important part of differentiating. It aligns with our IB philosophy, the transdisciplinary learning, and of course, it deepens understanding. So when they're working on a task that they're able to access, and they know what the success criteria is and the steps that they need to achieve that success, the learning becomes more meaningful. Using real life examples, using their own learning environment and the culture and context that they're in. When I first arrived at the school that I'm in, it's a US curriculum school that we converted to the PYP. We just recently got authorized. The teachers were doing a wonderful job by doing hands-on learning. That part wasn't a problem. The issue was that they were following very strict, although they didn't have textbooks, they were following the Common Core and using examples to make it real life. But the examples that were given to them was examples really set for the students that were sitting in the US.
In
So
America,
we're sitting here in the desert in like 50 degrees, and they were looking at, and the students were learning about moisture and condensation, but the example was the Statue of Liberty. And you look outside the window and it's desert, and we've got beautiful skyscrapers here. So it's kind of like changing that and making it more real life, more meaningful, using names and places that students can relate to. And all of a sudden the learning just completely changed, and then differentiating it in that way. So reaching all the students, you know, and making it more real life and meaningful for them.
Yeah, I could totally relate to that because, and Karen, I know that you have this issue as well, because again, depending on the resources that you're using, like Karen is in Sweden, they're using Everyday Maths, which is an American curriculum for maths. I've been working in Europe. We've been using White Rose Maths, which is an English curriculum. So
Right.
yeah, appreciating, you know, the authenticity and being able to make those differentiated shifts based on the curriculum that you're using. Yeah, good point.
Yeah. And there are, of course, guidelines that we have to follow. I know coming from Dubai, we have the KHDA, Abu Dhabi has EDEC. There are very strict guidelines that they're expected to follow. So with like that White Rose math, you have to kind of teach that because the students have to sit the GL assessments or the MAP tests or whatever it is at the end of the year. So, and there's no harm in doing that. They still need to learn the pounds and pence and dollars, but alongside that, kind of making sure that they have the real life examples too. So it is a lot of juggling, not ticking boxes, but also making sure that they're getting the knowledge, but that knowledge is meaningful. We're not saying like let go of all the standards and outcomes that you have to teach, but kind of keeping in mind that it just has to be meaningful and it has to reach all the learners. So different types of differentiating, but obviously by readiness, when they're ready to move on to the next level, to kind of dig deeper and go more conceptual, which is extremely important. Instead of just teaching the knowledge, we're teaching them the skills and how to access that knowledge.
Yep, so important.
And once they have that skill, they're able to kind of, you know, just take charge of their own learning. And it's not just the knowledge. By interest, this has always been a difficult one for me as a teacher because you've got so many different interests in the classroom. You've got some wanting to talk about their different Snapchat things, and others are into soccer, and others, and kind of just leaving it so open and so conceptual that it reaches all the learners, and kind of giving examples and giving questions or guiding the provocations based on your students' needs. And that this is where collaborative planning really comes in so useful, because you've got all those wonderful teachers sharing ideas, and then one classroom's provocation or one classroom's math questioning may be very different to another, but that is absolutely fine as long as the outcomes and the knowledge that they're gaining is the same. You know, we're still meeting all their standards. Learner profile, again, adapting it to the learner's needs. This one also changes all the time. Like 1 week, you've got one thing that works really well, and then the next week it completely can change. It can change with the units, can change with the math strands that you're teaching. So being open and flexible to changing the groupings, to allowing students to choose their own groups. I know a lot of teachers now don't set math groups or literacy groups anymore. It's very fluid. They're able to move from one conceptual learning to another, which it takes a lot of organization from a teacher's side, but it just makes the learning so much more meaningful. Adapting their learning styles, their learning environment also, instead of having them sit in one place or in one group, having that fluid and allowing them to be able to move from one center to another. That was my 20-year mark as a teacher. I used to, for the first 20 years, they didn't have, at the very beginning, they had assigned seats, but then I was kind of like, oh yeah, I'm very open-minded. I'll let them sit wherever they want, but they were still sitting at a desk. And I spent 20 years of my teaching career telling kids not to swing on their chairs, you know, come back and sit where you are. And I was like, this just has to. And then that's the year I completely took out all the furniture out of my classroom, and it became just flexible seating, couches, coffee tables, standing desks, a big community table. And I had no behavior problems at all after that, because there was no need for us to kind of confine ourselves into a place. They could just get up. The only understanding that we had to have was that if you're not learning, if you're not working to the best of your ability, get up and move, find the difference.
Yes.
And
yes, so
once they got
important that you
into
give them that option.
Yeah, once they got into that, once the novelty of, you know, having the couch and the coffee table in the classroom wore off, and it just took a day or two, it was just smooth sailing. So for the past 10 years, I haven't had any set seats or desks or tables in the classroom. it is a bit too much. You know, you're kind of introducing that a little bit at a time may work for some teachers. You know your learners well, of course, so you kind of
Or
have to do
even
that.
some students, Sally, you know, some
Yes,
kids struggle with, you know, this immediate change. So understanding. Yeah, I really
exactly.
like what you're saying with, you know, with using the learner profile as a key point for differentiation. I mean, using it more than simply as a reference point to, you
Yes,
know, for the children, I am a thinker, I am caring, but really with this whole child approach, like understanding our learners and using
yeah,
it from our perspective to help identify the different, you know, the diverse learning styles in our classroom. Yeah, it's a great point. Thank
exactly.
you.
Yeah, it does change and shift our understanding of how we're planning and reaching the students. Yeah, for sure. Yes, Susan, that's actually very good that you pointed that out. That year that I started the flexible seating, I had an autistic student in my class who also had a shadow teacher. For him, it was extremely important to have his office space. His desk was his office. That I didn't touch at all. He didn't really mind the chaos that was going on around him, and as long as his office space wasn't touched. So that was really, really important. And we still did have quiet work areas, independent learning areas. So really keeping in mind that it may not be for all learners, that this very open, flexible seating may not work for everyone. And if they and it may work for one lesson or one day and not the next day. And kind of just having that understanding that it's
Yep.
okay to go back to the more traditional if they need to.
Yes, agreed.
Um, and then by product. And the best way that I've found that, and I've watched, and all of my teaching styles and activities and learning engagements that I do that I think works really well are all from just watching other teachers. None of them are my own ideas. All of them are just from going into different classrooms, collaborative planning and learning and watching together. And that product, differentiating by products, what I found that worked best for my learners, and these were the ones in Dubai and here in Saudi Arabia, was to have an open-ended free question, kind of posing a question at the beginning of the week, giving them the whole week or 2, 3 days to kind of work on that. Like little projects, especially for the older students that are getting ready to do the PYP exhibition and mini exhibitions, just giving them that open forum to just discuss a real life conceptual question. That has really worked really, really well for me. And that by itself, that becomes your differentiated learning. So of
There's a
course,
sense of ownership as
it is
well.
sense of ownership. And they know how to. The last one that I've just seen last week, um, in one of our classrooms here was a grade 3 classroom. They have water bottles that they bring in every morning and they just
Yeah.
kind of put them on a shelf. And then every learner has to take their water bottle and line up. Works beautifully, but there'll always be one or two who forgets. Somebody needs to run upstairs. So the teacher said that she was doing area, perimeter, weight, and all of that in math. And she asked them to design like a basket, a box for somebody, for a few learners to be able to carry. And that's what they did. That was their whole week they spent measuring and weighing and deciding and, and now they've got this huge box, two of them, because there's, I think, 18 students in that class, two boxes that they take downstairs and then they bring back upstairs. They
Meaningful.
designed it, they made it, they created the whole box. They had like sketches of what it would look like and small water bottles, bigger water bottles, but those kind of questions. And the whole class was involved in the same question, in the same inquiry. All of them met all the outcomes. Of course, it was all very differentiated. They all got there at their own space and at their own pace and level. Yeah, so
So
just
the couple of keys I'm really noticing right here is
yeah.
flexibility with
Mm.
from us, you know, for us as a teacher, we have to have that flexibility, that openness, open-mindedness, and authenticity with the learning. So
Yeah,
that's what I'm pulling from it.
yeah. And it's also just, it's okay if it doesn't work. If it's okay if it's chaotic that day, if it's okay if that lesson doesn't go as planned, because every single moment is a teachable moment. And it's a wonderful way for students also to see that we're doing our wondering and our questioning and we're changing our styles, we're kind of adapting it, which is exactly what we're expecting them to do. Not be so rigid in the way that they learn or where they sit or who they choose to work with, but kind of being open to that. When they see their teachers doing the same thing, facilitating the same kind of learning. It's just so much more powerful because we're modeling it. And that just becomes meaningful for the students.
Exactly.
So
yes, Karen's saying, yes, we learn more from our mistakes.
exactly. And continue to make so many of them. So we talked a little bit about flexible grouping, rotating the groups, not really being stuck in this like medium, high, low, spicy, medium. There's so many different ways of like teachers using different language. And again, which is absolutely fine. If you're teaching a math concept on fractions, let's say, and you know that your learners kind of need to reach that goal, but being able to let go of that a little bit and just be a little bit more flexible with the grouping, mixing mixed abilities and not just grouping students in one thing, not really capping their learning, just allowing that little bit of freedom of choice in their grouping also. Choice boards and menus is obviously nothing new, but it works so well with guided reading, with the math concepts that we're teaching, with the units of inquiry also, with just how they're inquiring into the different lines of inquiry and just giving them a choice. I also had students coming up and really working on these choice boards with us. We had gotten to the stage where in our collaborative planning, we were able to include students. So student voice was a very big part of our collaborative planning. They contributed, they had many wonderful ideas on who to bring as guest speakers and where to go for field trips. And then we moved it up a little bit and they were also able to contribute to these choice boards.
So their input is involved, yeah.
Their input is involved and they have a say. So when the time comes for them to be doing this, for the guided reading, for the spelling, whatever it is, it was their idea. So then they kind of have more ownership and they just get right in there. Instead of us telling them that this is what they need to do, they were part of the planning. Again, it gets tricky depending on how many classes you have, how many students, but slowly bringing that in. I had started, when I was PYP deputy, I had started that with my students just within my own classroom. And then we moved it out into the grade level, having the students be part of the collaborative planning. So, just getting them involved in,
Yep.
yeah.
I find that too, when you involve them in the co-planning, no matter if it's just a teeny tiny step at first or going straight, into the actual planning of an inquiry,
Yeah.
it really, you have them at that point. You know what I mean? They have that sense of ownership, the accountability. Absolutely, their voices, it counts.
Yeah. 100%. You have the buy-in, just the same way we do with the teachers. When everybody's involved and everyone's co-creating units together, there's that buy-in from all the teachers instead of a school or principal or coordinator kind of handing over units. When teachers are creating it themselves, they have total ownership, and it's the same with the students. The tiered assignments, this is kind of like the tiered assessments also. Creating an assignment, and again, it has to be an open-ended, inquiry-based question, a provocation, but creating an assignment that has tiered levels. So for teachers to be able to assess, kind of set the success criteria, and then this leads into the different assessments that we're going to have to do, assessing in different ways, but the same outcome. They're reaching the same goal in kind of different ways. The same with these assignments of creating. So I have a few of the examples of these, and it's also on my Instagram and on my blog. And I'll continue to add more of these as we create them and as I find them from different teachers sharing them. But these are just excellent ways of tiering assignments to reach different outcomes. Graphic organizers. I mean, how long have these been around? And they keep coming up all the time. And it just keeps coming up in differentiation, for provocations, for pre-assessments, using them as summative assessments, the formatives. These ones are obviously the basic ones that a lot of us know and use, but there's the visible thinking routines from Project Zero, the Harvard Project Zero. And I always go back to those, the Ron Richards. I don't know if a lot of you are familiar with
Yep.
that, but the visible thinking routines, the tug of war that you can use in classrooms. They have many, many different resources, valuable resources on the visible thinking routines from Harvard Project Zero. And the way that they've done it is they've kind of organized them in different ways of like how we want and what we want to achieve. So if it's a provocation, they've listed all the different graphic organizers that would go under that. It doesn't mean that those are the only ones you use, but they've kind of sorted them out for us in different sections to kind of
It's
make
so
it
valuable to
easier.
see that.
Yeah, just to make it easier for teachers to get started with those. And learning stations, and then exit tickets. These exit tickets are, again, so many different. I've seen a lot of teachers sharing these on Facebook also, and on Toddle, for those of you who are on Toddle. And so many different ways of just the thumbs up, thumbs down, exit tickets, using Mentimeters, kind of incorporating technology as much as we can at the beginning or end of a lesson to kind of get these very quick answers from the students so we know where they're at. So that can also be used as a little assessment, but it's also differentiates the learning. And then we know kind of where to pick up for the next lesson or the next day.
So it gives us that transparency again. The children
Yeah.
sharing their thinking, we get to see it. We know what we have to reteach, what we, you know, what our next steps are.
Exactly. Yeah. And they know where their next steps are. Some of I know some schools have to do the learning objectives and they have to have it on their boards or in their books, or, you know, that's again, one of the guidelines that they need to follow. A lot of excellent facilitators do that. And then looking at these exit tickets, they also get the students to set their own objectives. So they've got the learning objective, and then under that, they've written my objective for the next lesson. Or at the beginning of a lesson, they go back and they look at the marking, the next step, or whatever exit tickets that they've done, and then they set their own objective. So it's not only visible for us, but also for the learners, and it's setting the objectives for them. Susan, I'm not going to go too much into because I had done this, but assessment is today, well, everything is your area, but today assessment's your big one.
Yeah,
but
I'm going to go into how we differentiate assessment. Yeah.
Yeah, just like we differentiate learning, we're differentiating assessment. Yeah.
Okay.
So I'll stop there.
Fantastic, Sally. It's good to hear. You know, I always say this, that I learn more going into somebody else's classroom, you know, walking into different classrooms and seeing what my colleagues are doing. And so it's so good to hear your examples, your stories from your classroom and from the classrooms of, you know, your team, people that you've been working with, just to be able to see whether it's just a subtle something different or a fresh idea. I always get some great ideas. So thank you very much for sharing your expertise. 29 years.
29. Yeah. I pretend that it's not that long, but
but it just went like that. It just went
did.
like that, right? I'm sure
did,
Jamie can
yes.
relate. Okay, superb. Well, let's move into, I'm already getting some questions as well in the chat. So if you do have any other questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, because we will have a live Q&A at the end. So what I'm going to do is just share my screen, and then we will step into more practical strategies. So can everybody see my screen? You good? Well, good. Yep, can see my screen? Okay, perfect. All right. So really, you know, Sally has clearly shared what differentiation looks like in its many forms, and also why we differentiate as a critical approach to our teaching. So what you can now do with some of these ideas, and coming forward as well with what I'm about to share, is like pick and choose your strategies that you can then apply to suit your unique group of learners. And the key thing that really stood out to me from Sally's sharing is like, we have to remain flexible. You know, we sometimes we have to reduce our expectations, lower our expectations in the beginning, as you see what works and what might need to be amended. And as Sally said, if you fall flat on your face, if it's complete chaos, that's okay too. Every day is a learning moment. Okay, so before we go live with our live Q&A, I want to also remind you that you have access to a certificate of completion in your teacher's notes. So if you are a subscriber to pypteachingtools.com, you would have received your teacher's notes in an email. If you did not get them, don't worry, I will send the link again so that you can access the certificate of completion if you need it. I've highlighted it in the teacher's notes. There's a link right there. It's editable. You just have to type in your name and date and so on and so forth. So as I said, if you're watching this on the replay, I will get that link to you as well, and then you can access that certificate of completion too. I am also going to briefly touch on the monthly membership for Essentials for Inquiry. Which is our, it's a monthly community service where you basically walk out with what we're doing right now, actually. So a professional learning moment, a snippet, it can be an hour long, it can be 10 minutes long every single month, along with tools to support the professional learning. And then you have this all access pass, but I'll go into that in a wee bit more detail at the end. So let's go back to differentiation. So Sally was really talking about, we have this group of diverse learners, and we know that one size does not fit all. So multiple is universal in the world, but particularly within our small universe in the classroom, is just as our students need different ways to engage, to access information, and to express their understanding. They also need multiple ways to be assessed, to assess all of that. And assessment in the PYP is not one size fits all. So assessment is also differentiated. It's very inclusive, and it's an ongoing process of reflection and growth. So by using these self-assessments, peer feedback, which Sally also mentioned, we've got feedback coming in, creative tools like mind maps, those graphic organizers type of things, teacher conferences. What we're doing is we're honoring individual learning journeys. And when we differentiate assessment, we ensure that every student has a voice in their success. So we can break it down into more manageable sections. We can break it down into manageable sections, content, process, and product. But what we want ideally is a synergy between all three areas as we consider differentiated assessment. Now, taking a look at this word, responsibility. So in the PYP, we're not just teaching content, we're cultivating responsibility, the ability to respond intentionally. And differentiation empowers this by honoring each kid's voice, each student's voice and their needs. And when learners participate wholly, so through choice, agency, authentic, meaningful inquiry, they become the active drivers of their learning, not just passive receivers. And that's basically student-led learning at its core. So we want the children to recognize this too. Now, we did have a couple of questions like, how do you do this with 5-year-olds? Well, bear with me as we go through this. So our role as a PYP facilitator, so whether you've been doing this for 20 years or you're just in the door with the PYP, or maybe you've been teaching for decades, but the PYP is new to you, your whole role as a teacher is to help the children to understand the world in which they live, rather than giving them information about the world. We want them to be figuring all of this out. So as I constantly harp on, it's not our job to make meaning for the children. We want to be in the learning phase together. So it's my job to co-construct knowledge, to provide the opportunities to help the children to develop those skills for learning, their ATL skills, which Sally mentioned, so that, and these are the ATL skills are basically the toolkit, so that the children can then do their job most effectively. And so when we have differentiation with assessment, what we are really what is it that we're assessing? And within the PYP, within concept-based inquiry, assessment, well, within anything, assessment needs to identify what the children know, what they understand, and how they can apply their learning, how their learning is being transferred. With concept-based inquiry, we have many of those things which are actually abstract. So we ultimately want to support our learners and inform the children of their progress. So if we look at the essential elements of the framework, these are the parts that we are assessing: content, concepts, learner profile, ATL skills, taking action, and many of this is abstract. So if you note that only a couple can actually offer something, absolutely tangible, the rest is largely abstract. And a lot of what we assess in the inquiry-based classroom is, in fact, the abstract. So what we're going to look at now is ways to assess the abstract as we progress. But the big questions that we need to consider is what about the students' learning? What about the learners' learning? Now, I'm not going to go into the whole, I don't want to dive too much into what assessment is in the PYP. We'll cover that in a much more in-depth workshop. It's actually covered within my course. If you've gone through my course, it's actually coming up on month 6. If you're in the monthly membership, there's like over an hour of this workshop coming. But basically, keep in mind, as we assess the abstract, so the concepts, the skills, the learner profile, in addition to the content, there's many creative ways that we can do this. But if you think about assessment, it's made up of 3 components. You've got your feedback, your observations, and your products. And we tend to focus more on products than process. So if you notice here how products, it only takes up 1/3 of the triangulation of assessment, and data, 2/3 of the triangle are comprised of the process of learning. So this is the part that includes the abstract. So we want to spend more time in the abstract. In the process. So what we need to do is to bring the children into this practice, involve them in the assessment of their learning, giving them their voice, their choice, and that ownership, which Sally said brings us to the buy-in. So how do we assess these abstract elements like concepts and learner profile attributes? One of my favorite tools is a mind map, a concept map, mind mapping. And it's a graphic organizer. It's making thinking visible. It's reducing cognitive load. And mind maps allow students to visually represent their thinking using colors, images, words, numbers. So right there, you have differentiation. You have that opportunity to choose how to demonstrate your understanding, giving their voice something tangible, so that we have, rather than making it all the same, we now have the graphic organizer is the same, but the approach to sharing their understanding is varied. It's differentiated. It's naturally differentiated, which is what choice brings, natural differentiation. And you can use these kind of things in peer assessment, teacher-student conferences, or even family feedback. These are approaches that keep assessment authentic, meaningful, and student-driven. Okay, so again, not going to go too much into what assessment looks like in the inquiry-based classroom, since I really want to focus on differentiation here, and I am aware of time. But these are some points that you definitely want to consider. So we're aiming for evidence of the transfer of conceptual understanding, content, knowledge, and skills. And it's going to look different than in your traditional classroom. You'll be assessing things that we wouldn't normally think about assessing. But ultimately, you want to move away from those specific objectives and have more open-ended outcomes. So if you look at this continuum of inclusive assessment right here, very fundamental continuum of inclusive assessment, ask yourself, where are you now with your class? And then you can consider some strategies that, as Sally has shared and as I'm about to share, that you can plan to implement to begin moving forward. And there's no race to get to the end of this. And as Sally said, every day can be different. I saw something really interesting yesterday, actually. It said that as a teacher, we're dealing with, let's say you have a class of 30, we're dealing with 30 different nervous systems, including your own. So we don't know what's going on at home. We don't know, what's happened at playtime. But really, every single day could be different, and it's not a race to work your way through this. And there's no goal where you all have to be at the end of this continuum where you're co-planning assessment, and of all of that. It boils back down to my 80-20 rule. The goal is to help work through this continuum with the children, and if you get to the end of it with some of the kids, great. If you don't, that's okay too. So really looking at the continuum of inclusive assessment practices, notice how we are gradually and progressively teaching the children to think for themselves, to reflect, to be reflective, learner profile attribute, and then with all of that, to assess more independently, to become a greater part of the process of monitoring their learning, documenting their learning and their progress, and then gradually removing the scaffolds as the children become more involved in the planning of the assessment and bringing their voice and their ownership and their learning to it. Growth is greater than grades. I had that up in my classroom with my grade 3s because we were teaching in America and it was all focused on grades. I was like, growth is greater than grades. I was being a little rebellious there. Okay, so really boils down to planning. Make time for plan the time for those conversations, plan the time to have the children decide what they need, to understand how they can identify what they need, and then really value their opinion. So we're really planning time for options, for opinion, and for ownership when it comes to differentiation. And when you have agency and assessment, when we have differentiation, options are the same as choice, right? So, and choice initiates voice. So an easy and effective place to begin for all ages is by providing choice, by providing these options for all ages. So for those of you who are asking me, how can we co-plan with 5-year-olds? Here we go, give them some choice. So because choice actually initiates voice, then the children, they pause for a moment to make decisions for themselves. They're stating their preference. They're coming up with ideas for themselves. In other words, they are taking ownership of this part of their learning. Now, we all know it's more motivating to do something that you choose instead of something that's been decided for you. And so this is also empowering for the children as well. Now, we can provide opportunity for increased agency in a number of ways, as Sally has already shared some examples with your choice boards, with flexible seating, and what we're doing is we touch on some of these forms of agency as we provide structure. Really important that we don't abandon that structure for effective reflection, for effective assessment, for effective feedback. And so self-guided learner is leading us into what we call inclusive assessment as a practice. Now, going back to that point when it boils down to really focusing on providing open-ended experiences. Now, learning experiences can be used to document learning and then using that documentation as evidence. And you want to explain this to the children as well. I mean, this is an example from preschool. So you've got thinking skills in here, you've got making connections, thinking skills. You've got, this is the main one right here, is making connections, so thinking skills. And there's no wrong answers here. You've got this tangible result product, which is documenting an abstract, it's analyzing and it's assessing an abstract thing, the thinking skills, a thing. There's a technical word. So really what we can see is now we can see where the children are making their connections. There's no wrong answers, and the value really comes from the conversation. It requires conversation. This is the feedback. This is the voice that is coming forward. So you definitely want to be recording the feedback in your notes. And this can be done with, learning experiences all the way through to an option with assessments. So again, you've got options, you've got the children's voice coming through. This was a summative assessment. It's an example of kindergarten, and they are using, they're providing options for the children. So it was something to do with writing a story, fairy tales. Their inquiry was into fairy tales. And so step one was, well, choose who you will work with. And then step two, choose a story or write your own story. And so there's a list of stories there: Cinderella, Goldilocks, Star Wars, which the children were also involved in being a part of that selecting those stories. So choose a story or write a story. Who's going to do what? And then decide how you will show the story. So right there, you have options. So you've got your differentiation happening. You've got the children's voice, choice, and therefore that buy-in is much greater because they're making the choice, and then you can assess their understanding on the concept of whatever it was in that case. So simple but effective. Excuse me. I don't know what happened there. 1 second. Oh, goodness me. Jamie, I always come back to your heart maps. Goodness. Okay, apologies. So again, filling in the blanks, taking the time to show and tell a concept map. It can be pre-assessment, it can be post-assessment. It's basically reflecting and sharing. And you can add this to portfolios as evidence of learning. And you've got the students' feedback in there. You've got the teacher's input in there. It requires a conversation with the children to justify and explain their thinking, so that all important voice is coming through. This is an example from PYP4. Again, you can see the structure here. Now, this is an assessment. This is formative assessment. So differentiated in the sense that everyone gets the same map, the same concept map. There are blank spaces in there to allow the differentiation to take place. So I have provided the concepts that are necessary for the unit of inquiry: economy, connection, industry, environment, that kind of thing. And then I'm allowing the children to make the choices. How can you make those connections? What goes where? And so on and so forth. So really, you've got teachers' input, the structure, and it's got enough space for children's input. So this requires, again, feedback. You have to have these conversations, and these conversations can happen within small groups, your guided groups, your mixed ability groups. You can do it with partners. You can, I mean, it doesn't matter how you have that conversation. You've got to plan time for the conversation, for the feedback, so that you can then take it for the next step. Now, this is where you have a differentiated success strategy, or what we call the differentiated success strategy. So this is like, identifying what success looks like. We have a differentiated assessment here for maths. Obviously, it's something to do with area and perimeter. The children don't know which, I mean, I'm sure they could figure it out, but what I want them to do is like, are you going to be a rock star? And perhaps like A is rock star, or maybe you're a shooting star, B is shooting star, perhaps you're a superstar. So they're all stars in some format or other. They all get to be stars, but I want them to now choose how they will tell me what they know. And this also requires a conversation prior about self-management skills, integrity, etc., reflecting on which level best fits your current ability. So there's two keys there: your best fits and your current ability. So explaining that we're all able to make progress, even if we don't all begin at the same point. Even if we don't end at the same point, we can all make progress. And if you have what's the if you actually show the children what success looks like in any of these forms, pick one that suits you. And if you find that this one is too difficult for you, try another one. If you find that it's too easy for you, try another one. So again, I'm absolutely giving them options here. I do I know which will probably fit most kids? Yeah, of course I do. This is part of, my job, but I want them to know, and I want them to challenge themselves, and I want them to see that no matter which level they're at, it's all success in one form or another. So again, plan time for reflecting after the assessment, plan time for feedback after the results. So once we've got choice established, we want to develop the children's voice. And this comes through providing them with the tools, the skills, which are the tools, which Sally underlined. And it's all about being reflective. Being reflective. So when we have voice, we need to provide opportunity for explicit communication, especially in our ELL community, our English language learners. So when we have productive language, we're basically looking at the function of the language in however that looks like with the age level that you're working with. So we're presenting ways for the children to make connections, to share their thinking, and productive language, speaking and writing, it's essential for English language learners because it gives them a voice to express their thinking, not just to absorb content. So practical strategies like oral rehearsal before writing, perhaps. You've got your key vocabulary words. You could be using concept maps, giving the children those options to draw, to write, maybe acting out their thinking. All of these options empower every child to participate fully and confidently in the process of learning. So with productive language, the very basis of how we learn through language, you want to integrate it into as much of your daily routines as possible. So the repetition, the visual stimulus, it really helps with ESL students to become familiar with those words, and so that the words match the process. So you're constantly using those same words within the process. And what we're doing is we're embedding language development within this open-ended, inquiry-based learning that the children are naturally going to explore concepts and making connections and engaging with multiple perspectives. So it supports differentiation. So a few examples here, and I mean, these differentiation with ELL is limitless. It really is. Well, with anything really. But we want the content and the concept to be transferred as connections are made through active investigation. So I'll say that again. We want the content, of course, I'll never remember it, but basically what I'm saying is we want the content and the concepts to be transferred through hands-on constructivist approach, right? Through active investigation, those learning experiences. And so by scaffolding academic vocabulary, by modeling syntax in context, and then offering sentence frames or visuals, we meet the learners at the level they're at whilst still helping them to grow. So we have these pictures here, and there are scaffolds everywhere. You've got your, let me go back a bit actually. This one is grade 4. Scaffolds everywhere. You've got dual language, you've got word walls, you've got key vocabulary, you've got graphic organizers and concept maps, which help to reduce that cognitive load. You've got sentence stems. I mean, it's everywhere. And then with the younger children, you've got your word walls, but the word walls, you're using academic language that is specific to our process. Instead of A is for apple, nothing wrong with that. We can also have A is for action, so that those key words are coming in. And of course, you're immersing the native language with English as well. So we definitely want the content and the concept to be transferred as connections are made through active investigation. So those practical strategies, like I said, encouraging the children to use those key vocabularies, your inquiry board or learning wall, as we're calling it now, encouraging oral practice with vocabulary cards, oral rehearsal before writing, using concept maps, everything I've basically just said. What we're doing is we're giving children the options to draw, speak, or act out their thinking, and show their voice in the most authentic way that fits them in that moment. So we have options. We've looked at voice. Now what we really want is to, you know, with voice, we want effective reflection. There's no point in regurgitating the same old reflection. And I know some of you know what I'm talking about, where you get the same regurgitated reflection over and over and over. I found this good, I find that bad, sort of thing. But we really want effective reflection as the key here. So model the skill, scaffold and connect it with everything before, during, after learning activities. Make it an ongoing habit. This is why I have my reflection journals as a practice in my classroom. And you can have reflection journals for early years all the way up to grade 5s, grade 6s. You want to practice, you want to embrace failure, like Sally said. Embrace failure as a natural step towards learning and growing, reflecting on where things went wrong and how things could be helped for improvement. Really having this the sense of community throughout the process. You know, we support one another through feedback, and absolutely teach constructive criticism, both to give it and to receive it, because children they need to learn how to not only give feedback, but also how to receive it positively. A wee bit trickier, I hasten to add there. Not everybody is good at that, even as adults, but definitely a skill that is necessary. So what we're doing is we're teaching the children to be reflective. And this is an example of an anchor chart that started at the beginning of the year. And what I'm doing is I'm building up the children's skills for thinking independently within reflection. So again, it begins with modeling what it looks like, what it sounds like, what it acts like, what it means to be reflective. And then as the year progresses, as they become more adept at sharing their own voice effectively, then they start to add to it. Now, initially, they may go to this anchor chart as a reference tool to help them with their reflections, to help them choose, to help them learn the sentence structures, the sentence stems that we typically use in reflection. And I've broken it down here, reflecting on your learner profile, reflecting on the skills, reflecting on concepts, etc. So these reflections they're used as evidence of learning. That's basically what your reflection is. It's used as evidence of learning and understanding, as with documentation of progress with your skills as well. So again, another tool that you can use to support. In the early childhood context, you have, again, we're teaching the children to be reflective. So building up the children's skills for thinking independently. It begins by modeling what it looks like, what it sounds like, what it acts like, what it means to be reflective. So again, we've got this structured guidance with reflection. We're providing opportunities for sharing their opinions, their feelings at this stage, and for dialogue to take place. And then watch their actions, their non-verbal communication as well. So you've got your feeling sticks right here, where the children can choose their emotion, if you like. And then, of course, you've got simpler charts, which also allow voice through choice. Now, with collective agency, we're continuing to guide reflective thinking through integrating it into our day within our inquiries. And this picture, collective agency, is building upon each other's voice. So again, with mixed ability groups, you are offering questions. You've got the graphic organizer, the visible thinking routine taking place here. You've got children's building upon each other's ideas, which instills confidence in those that may not feel as confident with communicating for whatever reasons. So you've got this collective agency taking place with this community effort. Again, this is an example of community feedback. This is peer assessment. You're literally leaving it on the table in this case. So this was a gallery walk. We had peer analysis of, well, in this case, it was graphs, data analysis. And the sticky notes are children's feedback. So the children are analyzing each other's work and they're leaving their feedback so that when they're going around the gallery walk, they're going around the stations. From the teacher's perspective, I can see who is understanding and I can see where I may need to reteach based on their feedback. So with this conversation, again, obviously I'm asking them to justify their comments, maybe in smaller groups, but at the same time, this requires a great deal of work on constructive criticism, by the way, and how to use it to our benefit. But it leads us into ownership, into accountability, into responsibility. So once we've got choice established and we are working on children's voice, this comes through providing them with the tools, the skills necessary. We're now co-constructing the success criteria. So again, I keep harping on about transparency. You know, keep in mind that this is a partnership in learning. So we want to identify success, what it might look like. Now, these words that are highlighted, these are your action words. And these action words can be shared explicitly with the children. Now, obviously, here we've got pre-K and they're English language learners. So these are action words at the simplest, in the, you know, at their most fundamental. And we want the children to understand these action words. I can tell a story. I can ask a question. I can choose my own storybook. So these are the skills that are being focused on within the unit of inquiry. Now, this would look different, obviously, at grade 5, where you may have your content learning objectives up there. You can also highlight your action words, sharing them explicitly as part of your explicit teaching for the ATL skills. But we want to keep the learning goals transparent. That's what I'm basically getting at here, with the children, with the families, with your other team members. And so before we can expect the children to monitor their own progress, they need to know what success might look like. And so then determine where they could, you know, reasonably be on a continuum. So we're gradually making this shift towards inclusive assessment, which supports differentiation, our approaches to teaching, differentiated teaching. So the way we plan the process of assessment, it becomes less about setting the learning objectives for the children as a tangible outcome. I mean, obviously we know what our standards are, where we need to be, but then more about asking the children to show what they know. So if you remember this question, I use this with my students like grade 2, 3, 4, 5, how smart are you versus how are you smart? Use that one all the time. How smart are you versus how are you smart? Now this clip chart, which is free in my, if you go to PYP Teaching Tools to the free tools, it's free if you were interested in it. It became a routine part of this nursery classroom. This was in school in Abu Dhabi. And as the children became familiar with the ATL skills and what those skills looked like, what it sounded like in a nursery environment, then they could choose the skill and put their little clip chart up there to show what they were going to be focusing on. And then I could be, or not me, it was the teacher, they could be monitoring the progress, identifying, okay, so so-and-so is going to be focusing on observation in these thinking skills. I'm going to look out for her and make sure that we've got that happening. So this is another example that I've shared quite frequently. This was, I do this one quite frequently. This is a look at how we have the standards, in this case, writing, are very much, again, transparent for the children are given a choice as to which standards they want to focus on. So based on the pre-assessment of writing, we have the conversation, we have the feedback. And again, I have planned time for the opportunity to share the transparency of expectations with options. We've got feedback, we've got accountability, and they have a goal. They now know what they need to work on. So just to sum this up, really what we're looking at is you want to make time for these options, for ownership, for opinion, and then conversations about all of that. So that you, just as an example, this is this chart was from my PYP 5. Again, I'm asking them to sign up for one lesson group based on where. So these were the standards. You know, I need help evidencing my, I need a quick lesson about how to use commas. I still need help with my concluding. This was informative writing that we were working on. I know already who's probably going to put what where, but I want them to make the choice because they're, you know, I'm giving them the options. I want their opinion and I want them to take ownership of it. So just as another example. So monitoring progress, as with any assessment, we're differentiating the assessments. We're gradually giving the children more independence. We're increasing the complexity that allows them the opportunities to demonstrate their increasing understanding and the ability that we want them to do this in such a way that they are part of monitoring their progress. So what you're looking at here is from the pre-structural level all the way up to the extended abstract, which is solo taxonomy. Now, we don't have to go into solo taxonomy with our students, but we can basically break it down so that you've got this clear framework for assessing student understanding from, you know, from the surface to that deep thinking, whatever it looks like in your classroom. So it makes it ideal for inquiry-based learning. It helps both teachers and students identify where they are in the learning journey, from simply identifying facts to analyzing. And if you're one of Essentials for Inquiry monthly members, this is going into your membership this weekend. So you'll be able to download that in month 1. I'm going to add it to month 1 for you. So you'll be able to download this and you can do what you want. It helps with planning. It helps with, if you have older kids, it helps them to be able to have those conversations as well. This is a simpler method from a pre-K example. This is Nishi. Again, this is solo taxonomy right here. You're looking at the pre-structural level. I can roll the dough. This is the stair-step strategy, by the way. I can roll the dough. You've got your I can statements. I can use cookie cutters. You basically have this chart, which is differentiating the assessment, the outcomes. The children can easily identify where their skills lie on a simple continuum, and then they can move themselves up and down this chart. Those are photos, by the way. Those are photos of the dough in a circle, the dough in a snake shape, and so on. But basically, it's solo taxonomy on a chart. We get to see it. The children get to assess themselves. We can have those conversations. It's differentiated right there. Okay, I know I'm aware of time. We're almost done. I appreciate you sticking with me. So other ways to monitor conceptual understanding, and I'm just about to share some quick ideas with you. So as with any assessment, differentiation gradually gives more independence to the children. So it's increasing the complexity. It allows them opportunities to demonstrate their understanding, their increasing understanding and their ability. And we want to do it in such a way that the children are part of monitoring their progress. So this is a brand new resource that I've just put out there, spinners. Now I've been using these for years, but I've just put them into my store. Again, they're based on solo taxonomy, building up the complexity from the structural all the way up to the extended abstract with questioning, identifying, but really encouraging voice, choice, and ownership, reflection. Oh, wait, here we go. I'm getting fancy with animations now. So there you go. You can see how I'm breaking it down you can see it working it from the pre-structural level all the way up to the extended abstract level for upper grades as well. So those are designed for transdisciplinary learning. So those are really helping to assess conceptual understanding of the concepts within our units of inquiry, within our transdisciplinary themes. And they're very broad. Okay, so again, scaffolding assessment, scaffolding the process of assessment. In this case, understanding where the children, offering them space, giving the children space so that they can add their options in there. They can check off which parts I think they should be doing, but also they can give me their version of it. They can add to what they think they're going to be working on as well. And again, this is another scaffolded form of assessment for your little ones. You've got help with key language there, but at the bottom, you've got this very simple rubric, which is asking them to check on their work. I did use a capital letter, check. I spaced out my words, check. I sounded out my words. Well, that one didn't sound out their words. But anyway, that shows you that you've got these scaffolds in place as well. Now, last but not least, the GRASPS strategy. It's an excellent format for scaffolding that open-ended plan for assessment. It's the summative assessment is no longer a mandatory part of the PYP framework, but it holds its place in assessment, in assessment of learning, and as a great celebration of learning. So it's a great strategy for developing, those skills, all kinds of abstract skills, whilst giving the children the opportunity to sort of showcase their learning independently, or I should probably say collaboratively, because it's a very collaborative experience. Okay, so I am going to stop right there, and we will go to any questions that you might have. So I can see that, hi Pooja, I see that you just joined us. Hi Riza. Hi, we've got a couple of people here. Nice to see you. I know that we've got some comments and chats in here, so let's see if we can get those coming up. Yes, so I answered that. Yes, there will be a replay. So I will send a replay out to everybody on PYP Teaching Tools. If I have your email address, I will get you the replay. Hi, Heather. Nice to see you. Okay, so Chewy, how do you balance grouping students based on their needs and letting them choose their own groupings? Sally, you talked about mixed ability and ability groups. Do you want to share?
Yes, sorry. So is this about how, so if you've got learners at different levels, how do you allow them to choose their own groups? So just like what you were sharing, Susan, with the success criteria, when they're co-constructing the success criteria, if they have an exemplar of what we want at the end and what the students want their learning to look like. So if you're providing them with, this is the end goal, kind of backward by design, and then the success criteria, and then allowing them to start at the stage that they're ready to start at, instead of giving them, this group, you can write one paragraph, here's a graphic organizer for you. This group, you write 2 paragraphs on your own, and then the rest of you just go start on your own. But allowing them to have that choice, as long as they know what their success criteria is, what the end goal is, they're choosing the level that they're starting at and the differentiated group that they're going to work in. Again, it takes lots and lots of observation and feedback and monitoring from the teachers. Some learners can choose the easier option, but then you have those little morning meetings and discussions at the beginning where you're constantly talking about, we're extending our learning, where is your learning right now, and how are you going to extend that? It's not about finishing this worksheet and choosing the easier option, but it's how do I challenge myself and push my learning? When they get into that learning environment and that community of learners, it just automatically happens. They always pitch at the right level. With my students, when I left the classroom, I was teaching grade 5, year 6, and they tried it even there. Even there, they would choose an easier option so they could finish first. And that just took a lot of monitoring from me And I would go up to them and say, okay, you've done the first two, brilliant. This isn't challenging your thinking. Push yourself up to the next level. And the more you do that, and the more they do that with each other, peer and self, they kind of can get that correct level. And then they're choosing their differentiated groups independently without
Thank
us
you.
having to indicate, kind of dictate that, because they all know what their success criteria is.
Yep. So it's a process. It's a process
It is
of
always, yeah.
self-management skills, coupled with, thinking skills, being reflective, and understanding why we're doing this in the first place. Thanks for that question, Chewy.
Exactly. Yeah.
Zahida, how do you get 5-year-olds involved? I'm hoping that I managed to answer your question with that, with a lot of the examples that I shared. Sally, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I think, yeah, I totally agree. It's all of those graphic organizers, the making the visible, learning visible, giving them those highlighted words that you were saying. That was excellent, where they're using those action words, which are the
Those action words.
ATLs.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, all of those tools to kind of get the young learners involved
Yep.
also.
Okay, thank you. Karen's saying, thank you, Sally. Differentiation, well, great reminder. Question of the week is something that she's going to be trying with her students. Thank you,
That'll be
Karen.
great.
Oh,
Yeah.
you've already answered that one.
Yeah.
Zahira, would this process begin by providing them with a few choices thought out by teachers and gradually letting the little learners come up with their own experience? Yes, absolutely, Zahira. Absolutely. Goes back to my 80-20 rule, where you have that structure in place so that you're basically modeling, right? And the scaffolds are there, gradually releasing the scaffolds as you see the children's voice beginning to thrive with their own options for those learning experiences. Yep. Definitely, Zaina, definitely using this idea with my kiddos. Awesome. Excellent.
That's great.
How smart are you versus how are you smart? I love it. That was Karen. You're welcome. Zaina, thank you both for inspiring us Saturday morning. You are very welcome. Feroza, I would like to sign up for the monthly subscription. Is there also an option for annual payment? Yes, ma'am. Also, will I have access to resources posted in the past? Absolutely. Thanks so much for today and all other sessions. I always learn so much. Okay, you're very welcome. I will be sending out information about how you can sign up for the monthly members group. So look for that coming in your email if you're interested in that. Yep, it's $8.99 a month, or you save money with the annual subscription as well, which obviously is a great deal. Chewy saying thank you. I think presenting the end goal so that they can decide how they want to group together is a good idea. That was from you, Sally. Excellent. Fatima, hey, Fatima. I didn't see you on there. You're very welcome. Zahida, you're very welcome. Chewy, the example shared also gave me a good idea on how to present the assignments to them. Superb. Fatima is going to be trying the level of tasks. Super. Ratika, I love this. How smart are you versus how are you smart? Yep. Awesome. Let me know how it goes. Felicia, where would you start if the whole class is EAL? Sally, you want to try that one?
That's basically all of our classrooms here. They're all
Yep.
second. English is their second. For some, it's their third language. So again, it's the same, providing a variety of different resources and not just giving them the same. Different sentence starters, the different graphic organizers, the very open-ended concept maps where they're able to show their thinking, and using language like use words, numbers, and pictures to show your thinking. It doesn't just have to be written, but you can just present it in a different way, opening it up so that it reaches all the learners, especially in the Middle East. 90% of our learners are EAL. It's their second or third language. So always keeping that in mind and making, finding the resources, the books, the videos, everything that reaches our audience.
Yep.
Then, yeah, keeping the knowledge in mind too.
If you think about maths, for example, right? Maths is a common language.
Right.
And children who are struggling with English, it's not their first language, they often have a much easier time with maths because it's a common language. It's so symbolic.
Exactly.
And so if you take that concept and switch it to a language, then you have it's a lot of work to begin with. You have a lot of visuals. coupled with your kinesthetic stuff, so your constructivist, your hands-on approach. And, you know, all these connections, the synapses are all making connections up here for these children. And you have your keywords, and it sounds like you have to exaggerate the words over and over. You do have to exaggerate the words over and over until eventually they get it. And you physically take the children over to your learning wall and point to them with the sentence stems, and you practice with them. Now, you can also differentiate your ability groups with your language learners. Another key I would say is like absolutely utilize the kids who know the language better.
Yes.
You know, absolutely have them as co-partners in learning. This is where it all boils down to student-led learning, is that the kids who can speak the language better can absolutely help with that. So lots and lots and lots of collaborative thinking. And as Sally said, lots of different visuals, hands-on, sounds, signs. I mean, the whole gamut has to come together. Is it a lot of work? Yes, it is. Yeah. But it's so worth it. It's amazing how quickly kids progress with language. Amazing. It might start with some tears at first, but, and I'm speaking from experience, sometimes a kid's tears, sometimes your tears. Zaina, how can the summative assessment choice be through continuous provisions? I'm not completely understanding your question, Zaina. I'm thinking I think what you're saying is like a summative assessment as a choice board. Is that what you mean? If you could clarify that. Do you understand, Sally?
No, maybe she means like an ongoing one, like the weekly.
There she is.
There she is.
Hold on. Hi. I teach pre-K, and we always have different continuous provision activities. So I just had a thought in my mind, because we're doing life cycles, if I want to give them choices of the summative assessment, I can ask them to show it to me through Play-Doh, through construction blocks, through Lego, so that's okay.
Yes, totally okay. Yeah. They're showing you their conceptual understanding of life cycles in the best way that demonstrates for them.
Now, yeah.
Sorry, I got a dog down here.
I don't want to give them just one task and say, this is the summative assessment of our unit. Show me a life cycle on a paper plate. I want to give them the choice to show me what they know through different activities that we do in continuous provision.
Yes. Do it, and then send me a picture.
Will do. I'm going to try that next week.
Excellent. I'm dying to hear how it goes. Okay. Vanny, thank you so much for your insightful session. Truly informative. The discussion not only clarified a lot of concepts, but also sparked new ideas. Vanny, you are very welcome. It is our pleasure. Feroza, how can I come up with a dynamic provocation for active planet covering natural disasters, impact and safety measures in 3rd grade? Oh my. Provocation. Yeah. You can like newspaper, you know, like newspaper articles, make them up. This is where AI comes in really well if you want to, you know, a video montage of a snippet of something like a volcano, or perhaps if you look at something like Mount Vesuvius, for example, which is an active volcano, and then you've got this honking great city at the bottom of it, Naples, and then giving them those guiding questions, those what if questions. So, you know, Sally, any ideas?
Yeah, I agree with that. Or maybe even like sentences like that provoke their thinking, but that's not always true. Like I used to use that a lot with like something that isn't. So I don't know, something like an earthquake is the only form of a natural disaster, and have that on the board, and then get them to kind of discuss why and what are the others, and how are they different. Things like people who eat chocolate are not healthy, and then they get into like how that isn't true, and how balanced diets and all of that. So they're just how, instead of always using, I used to use a lot of pictures and videos and sound and music, but then also just words and sentences that just provoked their thinking and got them to think deeper. that natural disaster one, just saying something like that. It could,
Yeah,
our
exactly.
provocation isn't always a big bang. It can be just be a very tiny,
Subtle.
anything that sparks their interest and gets that inquiry going is an excellent provocation.
Yep. Think about, there's two things here. Think about pre-assessment, like what do they already know? What's their background knowledge? And then some sort of question that's going to get them thinking. Alina has also suggested let the kids first listen to the sounds from the video and maybe guess what it's about,
That's
so
a
that
great
you've got this discussion happening. So again, you're going to get prior knowledge, making connections, and then show the whole video with the sound on. Thanks for that, Alina. Vanny, you're very welcome. Hi, Sweaty. Nice to see you. You're very welcome. Chewy, thank you. You're very welcome. HP, you are very welcome too. Oh, PYP4, awesome. Yeah, please do let me know. Heather, you're very welcome. Please do let me know if anybody tries out any of the strategies that you've seen today that Sally's mentioned. It's always a pleasure to share with our community. I will be sending out information about the membership, so if anybody's interested in that, and the replay as well will come to you. You have your teacher's notes. If anybody is looking for extra guidance, Sally is going into consulting very soon, so you can reach out to Sally, and she is highly experienced, as you've seen, with workshops, leading workshops, consulting, and so on, and she would be a great asset to any school. So thank you very much for that, Sally. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for
Yep.
having us. Yeah.
I hope everybody else has a good weekend. Thank you. Okay, bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.